I'm the Dean of the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences, and I'm really glad to see all of you here today. And I'm proud to welcome you to the 37th Annual Frontier Forum Lecture. The title today is Women, Animals, and Activism, a Call for Total Liberation, being presented today by Dr. Carol Glasser from the Department of Sociology and Corrections. 37 years ago, Dean Bill Webster initiated this lectureship in particular to highlight the scholarship and the scholarly activity that's done in the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences. It has become one of our most respected and anticipated events on campus. So again, I'm really glad that you're here to share with us this experience. Before I begin my comments, it's my pleasure to welcome the Interim Vice President for Advancement, Dr. Paul Schools.
Thanks. I'm here on behalf of the President, and he sends greetings, and with a title like this, Women, Animals, and Activism, it's like, how could you miss a lecture like this? I assumed it's about Donald Trump. Because I recognize the hair. But in any case, and I knew Bill Webster. Even when I met him, he was older than dirt, but he had all kinds of great ideas, and so he was one of the founding fathers, and it's great to hear some of the founding mothers now. And so we do appreciate that. As you know, this has been going on for 37 years, and it's been just a huge plus for the university. And on behalf of University Advancement, I enjoy taking part with this particular event because it does advance the things that I think this university should advance, right? These kinds of studies, these kinds of opportunities to share research are very, very important and exciting. Our division, and indeed the MSU Foundation, of which I also am a part, serve our students by providing scholarship support and grants for student research, enhancing faculty members' professional development, and helping build better facilities. And that's what we do where the learning takes place. And so we want to congratulate Dr. Glasser for being chosen to present this year's lecture, Women, Animals, and Activism, a Call for Total Liberation. I'm sure it's going to be an exciting talk. I cannot wait to hear it. We're delighted that all of you had a chance to come out and see it. And we expect to see you at the 38th and the 39th and the 4th, except we're also assuming that some of you will eventually graduate. Have a great time, everyone.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate your comments. I would like to start by welcoming this year's Frontier Forum honoree and presenter, Dr. Carol Glasser, and her special guest, who include students, colleagues, and friends. I, like Paul, am really anxious about the conversation about the presentation today. I know I'm going to learn something myself. And what better activity on a college campus than to bring a group of people together and have an opportunity to learn something new and leave having our experiences here on campus enhanced greatly. So I have no doubt that Dr. Glasser's presentation today is going to give all of us something to think about, something to reflect on, and I think the ultimate goal is that we'll all be thinking about it for some time to come. When Dr. Glasser finishes her presentation today, there will be time for questions and answers. So I wanted to make sure that you know that as you're thinking about the new information you're seeing today, jot down a question. I know that Dr. Glasser will be more than willing and actually enjoy the conversation with you afterwards. We do want to take a moment before we get started to honor our previous Frontier Forum recipients who are in attendance here today. Dr. Barbara Carson, please stand. Yes, you have to stand up. Dr. Cindy Miller. Pedro Thomas, Dr. Pedro Thomas, is he here? Okay, we won't clap for him then, we just Dr. Jack, okay. Dr. Jackie Vaselli. And last year's Frontier Forum presenter, Dr. Laura Harrison. The Social and Behavioral Sciences Research and Teaching Committee chooses the annual Frontier Forum presenter, and we want to thank them for choosing this year's outstanding presenter. If you're here, please rise. We'll recognize you, Dr. Kevin Darbo, Dr. Atreya Ghosh-Roy, and Dr. Jackie Vaselli. Thank you for your hard work. We will eventually bring Dr. Glasser to the stage, but one more person you get to hear from. It is my distinct pleasure, my distinct honor to get to introduce you to Dr. Maria Babakwa. Dr. Babakwa has served for a number of years as the department chairperson in Gender and Women's Studies, and Dr. Glasser has asked her specifically to make the introduction today. So please welcome Dr. Maria Babakwa.
Thank you so much, Dean Greer, and thank you, Carol, for inviting me to introduce you as our Frontier Forum lecturer this year. From 2013 to 2015, I served as acting dean of social and behavioral sciences, and hiring Carol has shown to be one of my great decisions. She teaches in the Department of Sociology and Corrections with a special focus on applied sociology. Dr. Carol Glasser holds a BA in sociology from Tulane University and an MA and PhD, also in sociology, from the University of California, Irvine. Before coming to Minnesota State, she taught sociology and women's and gender studies at University of California, Irvine, and California State University, Long Beach. I have it on good authority that her transition from Southern California to Southern Minnesota was perfectly seamless. Dr. Glasser came to Minnesota State in 2014 with a highly integrated program of teaching, research, and activism. Her doctoral dissertation investigated the history of the animal rights movement in the U.S., and many of her publications and ongoing research projects explore the intersection of animal oppression with other systems of oppression, such as racism and misogyny. Soon after her arrival here at MSU, she started the Social Justice Lecture Series, and she became the advisor to the Animal Rights Concern student organization. I myself am grateful to have a colleague who prioritizes vegan community building right here in Mankato. Dr. Glasser's research, teaching, and activism are animated by a deep commitment to the convergence of theory and practice. For some thought-provoking reading, take a look at Carol's blog, Vagina, which she calls Musings from a Feminist Vegan Rabble-Rouser. Included are useful alternatives to common animal sayings. You can't make granola out of gravel, and there's more than one way to peel a potato. On a personal note, in addition to everything I just said, I most admire Carol for her consistent advocacy for animals. She takes on the task of using her feminist vegan ethics to educate and inspire others, and for that, I am truly grateful. Her lecture today, Women, Animals, and Activism, A Call for Total Liberation, is sure to inspire critical thinking. Please join me in extending a warm SBS welcome to Dr. Carol Glasser.
Okay, I'm just going to make a quick microphone change. Is that working? Is it working now? Yes. Good. I don't have a PhD in anything related to technology. Thank you everyone for the warm introductions. I'm really excited to be here today. I want to give a special thanks to everyone who has just thanked, and particularly the Research and Teaching Committee, who did a lot of work to choose who would be here today. And I also want to thank the Dean's Office, who did a lot of work to make this happen, in particular Becky Gunnerman, Denise Thompson, Rachel Burlett, and Sunil Padet, who did all the organizing. And I want to thank the Gender and Women's Studies Club and the Animal Rights Club of Protecting Animal Rights Committee. There's a name change this year, because they did a lot of promotion for the event, so thank you. I'm sorry, I'm trying to find my tools. Here we go. So today I want to talk to you, obviously, about women, animals, and activism. And this isn't based on any one study of mine, it's based on a body of research that I've been doing over the years. I passed some things out. On one side is some reading, so if you're interested in reading more about this topic, there's some great places to start. The reading levels and the topics are noted on the bottom after each citation. And on the bottom of that, you'll see the things that I've written that this talk is based off of. And on the other side, I'm going to use a lot of terms and phrases, and all of them I may not define today because a lot of people know them, but some of you may not. So those are some good definitions you can bring back home with you or look to if I see something that's confusing. And then if you have to write an essay to prove that you're clear, those will be some 10-point words to bring into that essay. Okay, so I'm going to start where the current wave of the animal rights movement in this country started. And I'm going to start by talking to you a little bit about theory. In 1975, PeterSinger published Animal Liberation. In this book, he relied on the tradition of utilitarianism to argue that non-human animals deserve moral consideration. So to put it very simply, his basic argument is the fact that non-human animals have an interest in staying alive and avoiding pain means that they have a right to not be exploited and to have some rights. About 10 years later, Tom Regan wrote A Case for Animal Rights, extending what's called a Kantian framework to incorporate non-human animals. He argues that non-human animals deserve rights based on their mental capacities and subjective consciousness. Because they have active mental lives, non-human animals are what he calls subjects of a life. And for him, that's criteria of deserving of some rights in our society. While these theories remain really important for the development of how we think about animal rights, in fact, they're very important because these two books spurred the current wave of animal rights activism. They fall short, and they fall short in a way that a lot of traditional philosophies fall short. Feminists have broadly critiqued traditional ethics for bolstering masculine traits and discounting feminine ones. And PeterSinger and Tom Regan are guilty of this too. First, both theories rely on rationalism and making appeals to reason without any reliance on personal experiences and with a denial of emotional experiences and what those experiences mean. They both explicitly not only rely on reason, but they promote rationality above emotion. And they reject personal connections with animals as being important reasons to treat animals well. For example, PeterSinger actually begins the introduction to his book with a story about how he goes to a woman's house and she's an animal lover that does a lot to rescue animals. And she offers him a ham sandwich, and he rejects that sandwich. But he doesn't reject it because he likes animals. He makes it very clear. He's rejecting it because it's not rational to eat animals. He says very clearly he does not necessarily care about pigs at all. In doing this, he intentionally disassociates himself from traits that are seen as emotional, and in our culture, emotional traits are associated with femininity. First, denying feminine traits is a problem on a really practical level for the animal rights movement because women actually drive the animal rights movement. So the exact number is not known, but estimates range from between 67% to 80% of animal rights activists in the US are women, and it's expected that even a higher percentage are vegans and vegetarians. It's also a problem because being a social movement participant is not actually an overly emotional thing. Research has shown that sometimes people experience really shocking moments or really emotional moments, but the majority of people put those away and they don't do anything with them. Activists, on the other hand, think about what those moments mean, they think about the social situation they live in, and they make calculated decisions about the best way to make social change. So trying to separate emotional things that get people passionate and rational things that get people active is a real problem for this movement. In reality, emotions and rationality are not two opposite ways of being. It's not as if for every ounce of emotionality you were to drop into a cup, you would actually end up losing an ounce of rationality. These two things can exist at the same time, and in fact they need to if we want to have a good and just world. Even more problematic than these issues, though, are two additional important issues. First, both fail to make connections between the oppression of non-human animals and the oppression of other human groups, or other oppressed groups, such as women or the earth. This is a problem because if we, as people, don't understand how the oppression of non-human animals is related to us, we're much less likely to care about these issues, and we're much more likely to actually engage in the oppression of others. Another central problem is that these are philosophies and philosophies alone. They don't provide a really clear route forward to suggest ways in which we can change these systems that we find to be unfair or unequal. Feminist theories have critiqued these theories, added to them, and provided alternate theories that can better help us understand oppression and think about ways to actually change how animals, women, and other oppressed groups are treated in our society. The key feminist traditions that talk about both women and animals are called feminist care tradition, vegetarian ecofeminism, feminist vegetarian critical theory, and the list goes on. The key, I would say, seminal work of this type of thinking and the development of this theory is Carol Adams' Sexual Politics and Me, and it's on that reading list that I gave you. So if you're really interested in this topic, that's a really great place for you to start reading. Many of the concepts I'm going to discuss over the next 2 or 3 minutes are well discussed in this book, so if you're interested in them, I encourage you to turn to this book. Feminist theory allows for us to recognize, in the words of Carol Adams, that women and animals are similarly positioned in a patriarchal world as objects rather than subjects. But what's so key to these theories is that it doesn't reject this parallel. It argues instead, rather than women rejecting the parallel to non-human animals, that neither non-human animals nor women should be treated as objects rather than subjects in our society. What I hope that you'll all be convinced of today is that all forms of discrimination, including homophobia, racism, sexism, disableism, ageism, bias based on citizenship status, weight, country of origin, and more, are all rooted in the same system of oppression. And we need to turn our attention to dismantling this overarching system of oppression if we want to see any change. And I want to be really clear here. When I say that all forms of oppression are rooted in the same system of domination or oppression, I am in no way suggesting that all oppressions are the same. Histories of oppression, experiences of oppression, and what oppression looks like is never the same twice. In fact, that's why it's so hard for us to see how our own experiences of oppression and how oppression of different groups are actually related to each other. But we have to start learning how to see these connections in order to figure out ways to successfully overcome inequality. Inequality is maintained most basically through the process of othering groups. To frame someone as other is to make them different from ourselves. That makes it easier not only to ignore their oppressions or the way that they're treated, but to actually participate in their exploitation. Othering occurs most basically through dichotomous thinking. So dichotomies establish only 2 opposite ways of being, and only one end of this way of being is devalued. There are 2 types of dichotomous thinking that work together. First, there's either-or thinking that places boundaries between 2 groups. And then there's up-down thinking, which says that one of these groups is better than and deserves more right than and has more privileges than the other group. So let's use whiteness as an example to see how this works. First, the dichotomous way of thinking says that either you're white or you're not white. In reality, culturally, we accept a wide array of races and ethnicities. However, we often, and you'll even hear me do it probably today in the lecture, lump people who are not white into the people of color category. This is an example of a dichotomy. It's why Barack Obama was touted as the United States' first black president and not the United States' first biracial president. Dichotomous thinking also places whiteness as the privileged category in this situation. And that's why, until Barack Obama, every president in the United States has been white, and Christian, and men. That's because these are the privileged racial, religious, and gender categories in our society. Feminist frameworks and understandings of inequality help us to overcome this dichotomous way of thinking and see more variation in life. And we must free ourselves of this way of thinking and looking at the world if we want to make a more fair and just world. The feminist concept that is key to begin understanding in order to understand this is the concept of intersectionality. This concept was originally coined by Kimberly Crenshaw when she was describing the oppression of Black women. She was trying to make it clear that Black women experience racism differently than Black men, and they experience sexism differently than white women or women of other racial or ethnic groups. Intersectionality describes the way in which different forms of oppression simultaneously impact disadvantaged groups. Importantly, the effects of oppression are not additive. For example, a person is not separately and predictably disadvantaged by being poor, by being a person of color, and by being a woman. All of these disadvantaged positions instead interact, and the effects of oppression multiply. Consequently, a poor white man, a poor white woman, and a poor Latino woman will all have very different experiences of poverty. Most importantly, intersectionality helps us understand and acknowledge that we all have multiple sites of disadvantage, and we also all have multiple sites of privilege in our own biographies. Intersectionality has typically been used to explain the oppression of human groups, but non-human animals should most certainly be added to this equation. After all, the oppression of non-human animals is intimately entangled with the oppression of many other human groups. So U.S. slaughterhouses provide a stark example of the way that oppressions are entangled. The push for inexpensive food has led to a system that oppresses workers, the poor, non-human animals, immigrants, women, the environment, and others. The exploitation of non-human animals is obvious. In 2009, the last year for which full data was available, a full 9,078,208,000 land animals, that's cows, calves, sheep, pigs, ducks, turkeys, chickens, were killed in U.S. slaughterhouses in that single year alone. Understanding what 9 billion means is really, really hard because it's such a huge number. It's such a huge number that it's really easy for us to ignore it, erase it, and forget it exists. So I wanted to give you guys a visual. Right before we started today, right before Dean Greer came up to speak, I turned this on, and it has been counting the number of animals, the number of cows, pigs, and chickens who have been slaughtered in U.S. slaughterhouses since this presentation began. In less than 20 minutes, you can see that almost 500,000 chickens, almost 5,000 pigs, and over 1,500 cows have been slaughtered in the United States. But it's not just non-human animals who are suffering. Workers in these slaughterhouses face one of the highest risk jobs in the United States. The Human Rights Watch has deemed factory farms and slaughterhouses in the United States as the most dangerous factory job in the United States. Slaughterhouse workers sustain injuries at a rate 5 times higher than the national average. Further, companies often intentionally recruit very poor people and people without documentation, leaving them no recourse for opposing these unsafe labor conditions. Work stresses then spill into the community, putting women at particular risk. Research has found that all else being equal, communities that have slaughterhouses have higher arrest rates for violent crimes, higher arrest rates for rape, and higher arrest rates for other sex offenses. And it doesn't end there. Waste from slaughterhouses, as well as from the intensive production of animals on farms before they go to slaughter, also comes with an extremely heavy environmental toll. Waste from these operations releases ammonia into the air and contaminates groundwater. Poor people and people of color bear the brunt of this, as these industries are more likely to be located in their neighborhoods, and living in proximity to these industries is associated with higher risks of cancer, higher rates of asthma, and higher reproductive problems. The fast pace of the slaughterhouse also increases the risk of errors that can lead to the contamination of the resulting meat by pathogens like Listeria and E. coli. The lowest grades of meat that we sell involve the mixing of multiple parts of multiple animals, and this further increases this risk of this meat having foodborne pathogens. And notably, it's this meat that's incorporated into school lunch programs and fed to the poorest of our country's children. Many of these connections seem insidious because they're so hard to see. And being here in Minnesota, many people are going to tell me that they come from a farm where things don't happen this way, or they've seen a dairy where production doesn't work like this, or they've worked in an operation where things don't happen like this. And that might be true, but in this country, 99%, a full 99% of the meat we eat, the dairy we consume, and the eggs we eat come from factory farming situations like the ones that I'm describing right now. It can be hard to picture these things because we don't individually see them, but there's traces of it everywhere. For example, we just had the food outbreak at Chipotle. Notably, even when our vegetables have Listeria, E. coli, or other foodborne pathogens in them, it's often because of runoff from animal products in factory farming situations and slaughterhouses. In Austin, Minnesota, the Hermel plant was recently exposed for their egregious treatment of pigs, and this is not, and just in February, a worker drowned in a waste lagoon outside of a dairy, and unfortunately, this is not an isolated incident. Often the fumes cause people to pass out when they're doing work in these areas, and drownings have occurred at a rate of at least one per year for the last couple of years. As these examples highlight, oppressions are entangled in such a way that they're mutually connected, but they also reinforce and generate more oppressions. For example, if we saw non-human animals as subjects rather than objects, we would have a really hard time justifying the way we produce them and render them into products. This means, because we see them as objects, that we put them in factory-like settings and we produce meat at faster and faster rates. This in turn is what leads to these injuries of the slaughterhouse workers and the mass environmental devastation that comes from these industries as well. These oppressions are all linked together through an overarching system of oppression. This is what feminist scholar Patricia Hill Collins has labeled the matrix of domination. Carol Adams calls it a logic of domination. To fully understand intersectionality, it's important to understand this matrix of domination. We must just not understand personal experiences or experiences of individual groups of oppression, but we must understand that there's an overarching system that allows oppression to occur to many and benefit few. To fully understand intersectionality is to understand that experiences of oppression will differ within any oppressed group. So that's that example. A black woman and a black man will experience racism differently. Furthermore, experiences of oppression differ between oppressed groups. Individuals may also be affected by multiple oppressions at once, and similarly, they might also experience some positions of privilege, even while they experience some oppressions. And we take all this together, we realize that all social justice causes are actually fighting the same oppressive structures. Our political and economic systems and our cultural norms have to be changed. If we understand these facts, we realize any movement or campaign that supports any part of this oppressive structure will ultimately strengthen the forces of oppression in our society. To demonstrate the ways that oppressions are entangled, I'm going to talk to you in a bit more detail, specifically about the oppression of women and non-human animals, who are internationally some of the most frequently exploited groups. The simultaneous oppression of women and animals is quite literally everywhere, and we're aware of it, even if we don't initially realize it. Take, for example, these buttons. I think that they're really creative. They're great. They were actually created by MSU students in the Women's Center, and they make it obvious that when you're oppressed, you understand these connections, and you understand them very well, even if you don't know quite how to stop them or to articulate what they are. They show just how prevalent, as well, the connection specifically between women and animals are when it comes to being oppressed. If any of you can't see it, these buttons say things like, "Don't call me dear," "Women aren't chicks," "I'm not a piece of meat," "I'm cats against catcalling." That one's my personal favorite. As I said, the simultaneous oppression of women and animals is everywhere. Before I talk more about it, I do want to let you know that in the next section, I will be talking about the physical and sexual abuse of women and non-human animals, and there will be one graphic image of a non-human animal. So if this is something that won't be comfortable for you, I encourage you to take care of yourself, to step outside, and someone will let you know when this part is over. We'll step into the hallway and let you know you can come back in. So I'm going to start talking about the connections between women and animals by starting with talking about the connections between the physical and sexual abuse of women and non-human animals. The abuse of women, children, and non-human animals are often intertwined graphically in cases of domestic and sexual violence. Abusers often kill or threaten to kill animals, most often companion animals, in order to get their victims to comply. One frequent tactic used by people who abuse children to get them to remain silent about their abuse is to threaten their companion animals. Threatening animals is also used to keep women in situations of domestic violence. The American Humane Association found that a full 71% of abused women seeking shelter at a safe house said that their partner had threatened, hurt, or actually killed their companion animals. Another study in Ontario found that 48% of women who left their abusive partner said that the concern for the safety of their companion animals delayed their decision to leave. This leaves us wondering how many people never left because of their companion animals and wanting to protect them. In her work trying to stop the sexual abuse of animals, Ginny Edwards is at the forefront. Very few people are looking at this. But her preliminary research is finding that almost always when an animal is being sexually abused by a man, almost always when an animal is being sexually abused by a man, that there's also a woman, a child, or both who are also being sexually abused. Nearly 1 in 5 women in the United States experience sexual assault. It is the social attitudes that support the abuse of women via misogyny, via a rape culture, that allow daily practices in animal agriculture that are sexually abusive to go unchecked as well. In turn, the way we treat female animals on farms as breeders, forcing childbearing and taking their children away so that we can use their products for their bodies, with generally very little concern for their well-being, then reaffirms a culture that accepts and tolerates sexual violence towards female-bodied individuals. The dairy and egg industries are profiting the most off of the forced reproductive labor of female-bodied non-human animals. People with power have always objectified women for their reproductive capacities. For example, there's a long history of affluent women hiring, indenturing, or enslaving other women as wet nurses. Denying one's own offspring nourishment to give it to the children of more affluent women is something few mothers would choose unless strained by economic necessity. And this trend continues today in Western societies and cultures with non-human animal surrogates who have no choice in the matter but to produce for humans. Dairy production, for example, and perhaps most explicitly, directly targets female-bodied individuals in a sexually violent manner as well. Female cows are literally raped by machines and humans and unwillingly impregnated. That's what you're seeing here in the bottom picture. Those are cows being inseminated by humans. They have their infants then stolen from them, for we cannot get milk from a cow unless that cow has a baby and that baby does not drink that milk. They're pumped full of hormones to overproduce breast milk, and their bodies become so depleted through operations like the one that you see at the top picture that they're sent to slaughter a full 15 to 20 years before they would naturally die. And cows are not the only non-human animals who systematically suffer in agriculture for their reproductive labor. Chickens are forced to lay eggs. Female animals are forced to breed so that their offspring can be used for a variety of economic interests, including experiments, their fur and other clothing, entertainment purposes, breeding for companion animals, breeding for zoos, to live in zoos, and more. The list is too long to go into much detail about any one of these scenarios. Outside of the context of dairy production and other animal agriculture and breeding operations, individual acts of sexual violence or forced sexual activity enacted on non-human animals disgust most people. I literally saw some of you make cringes of disgust when I talked about the sexual abuse and exploitation of non-human animals about 2 minutes ago. The only time these acts are glorified is in pornography, when human women are degraded alongside male, non-human animals. Somehow there's sexual pleasure in watching the simultaneous degradation of women and animals. These images reflect a pathological degradation of the other, and they're only acceptable in a society that devalues women and devalues non-human animals as well. At this point, if anyone steps in the hallway, Sarah, you can let them know that they can come back in. The mutual oppression between women and animals is reinforced through many of our daily practices. So for example, we can look at gender and food. Women in our culture bear the brunt of preparing food for their families, while animals' bodies are often the centerpiece of a typical Western meal, even though nutritionally they're not necessary. While women do the labor of meal preparation, non-human animals are literally killed without their consent for our food. Another very basic and daily way that the mutual oppression of women and non-human animals is connected, that I want to go into a little bit more detail about, is through language. For example, through insults used to belittle or control women. Derogatory phrases reflect those whom a society devalues, either in the past or currently. And it highlights a culture's racist, classist, ableist, and speciesist ideology. A phrase like lame, for example, is only an insult if we understand that our society devalues people with differently abled bodies. Animals and animal-related phrases are often used to establish a devaluation of others, just as phrases referring and comparing people to women or to non-heterosexuals is often used to degrade others. Throughout U.S. history, there have been two things in common about whichever ethnic minority is being blamed for the society's problems. First is that the people in this group will be the ones doing the most labor, the hardest labor, and receiving the least pay and legal protection for the labor that they are doing. Currently, these roles in the United States are filled by Mexican immigrants and similar others, such as Latinos. Second, there will be derogatory terms linking these groups to non-human animals. African slaves were kidnapped and brought to the U.S. from the 1500s to the 1800s. They were worked, tortured, murdered, raped, and all without consent and much less pay. This was easy to do because they were likened to animals. They were likened to the other in images and language, and they were literally called monkey. In the mid-1800s, Chinese immigrants were recruited to the United States to build the Central Pacific Railroad. As they built the infrastructure for this country to develop westward and realized the goal of manifest destiny, they were likened to rats. They were portrayed as rats on trading cards and advertisements, and they were said to be like rats, which stood in for meaning they were dirty, untrustworthy, and unintelligent. And I don't know if any of you know much about rats, but those are actually not traits that the actual species, individuals of the species rats, often have. So here's a really graphic example of what that looked like. This is actually an ad from the mid-1800s for poison to kill rats. Here you see that they're degrading this Chinese person by insinuating that he is like a rat, and they're degrading him by insinuating he would eat a rat, and it's vicious enough to suggest that perhaps you should kill the rat with this poison because you might get lucky enough to kill a Chinese person too when they eat the rat. Today in the United States, Latinos are working the least desirable jobs, and if they're undocumented, they often have no legal protections and are paid inhumane wages. Latino women are said to breed like dogs or rabbits. Other slang includes border bunny, referring to illegal border crossings. Pollo, the Spanish word for chicken, is what border control agents call Mexicans at the border. And mule, referring to drug mule, suggesting that all Latinos are in fact drug dealers. And this just names a few of the inaccurate insults that we use today. Epithets to degrade women by likening them to animals also abound. Women are sexualized and objectified for being likened to non-human animals, chick, fox, vixen. Annoying women are bitches, or they henpeck their husbands, or they brood over their children. Unattractive women are cows. As women are devalued by being likened to non-human animals, men who choose to be vegetarian or vegan are often linguistically devalued by being likened to women, women's body parts, or gay men. They're pussies, sissies, fags, Real men eat meat, as this meme highlights. Likening disadvantaged groups to non-human animals and women is an attempt to belittle, degrade, dehumanize to other people. But understanding that the same system of oppression belittles all of these other groups allows us to realize that the struggle is not to fight against the parallel that's being made, but to form groups, coalitions, partnerships with these other groups that are being devalued so that you can fight the injustice and the system that is allowing for this inequality in the first place. We understand mutual oppression on a basic level, but what I want to encourage us to do today is to understand what it means in the context of actually working together to bring social justice and end oppression. Movements for social change that don't understand that their cause is tied to the causes of other groups can be very problematic. They might actually oppress others in their route to trying to free themselves. This is how oppression maintains itself. It allows various oppressed groups with very little power to see themselves as different from other oppressed groups. Rather than joining together and gaining power in numbers, it keeps oppressed groups fighting against one another. This is what Elizabeth Martinez has called the Oppression Olympics. As civil rights activist and writer Audre Lorde reminds us, there is no hierarchy of oppressions. This can lead to single-issue politics, and this occurs in the animal liberation movement by promoting the rights of non-human animals over others. So, I'm going to pick on animal rights. I think this happens in all social justice movements, but we'll look at what it looks like when a social justice movement embraces the oppression of another group in order to forward their own cause. So here are some really clear examples. There's an ad poking fun at women who don't fall into the cultural ways we're supposed to spend time maintaining, restraining, and feminizing ourselves. Fur trim, unattractive. Here's a very confusing image of a sexy, I guess, naked woman straddling broccoli, trying to encourage us to eat more vegetables and become vegetarian. And here I also want to show you a short video, provided it works. Oh no. This is not working. Oh no. It's very confusing to me. Okay, well, maybe we don't have to watch this video. Okay, I guess the internet's just gone. What's happening with this mouse? Can the tech person help me? Anyway, I'll describe what that was. There's a woman and she's walking down the street and she's bruised and she's got something on her neck, and it tries to play so that you think it's a domestic violence ad. And you come to find out that she's abused and bloody because her boyfriend is pounding her so hard in the bedroom because he went vegan. And he's now a tantric porn star. And what this is doing is trying to play on our cultural ideas of gender in order to make some, yes, right. Please put there, open back. Well, let me open that. Does that work?
Yeah, it does actually.
Okay, cool, we're back. See, I should have had a PhD in IT. Okay, so what this does is it plays off of these ideas we have about gender that are problematic in order to create humor to try to promote animal rights. But there's no joke in any of this. There's no joke in domestic violence. Every day in the United States, between 1 in 3 women are murdered by their domestic partners. Gendered appearance norms are also dangerous. They're often the foundation of bullying, violence, and self-inflicted harm, like eating disorders as well. And it is not just the animal rights campaign that's devaluing women. Here we have a picture of a leg of a pig dressed up to be like a woman, and on the bottom it says it's not acceptable to treat a woman like one. This is an anti-domestic violence campaign that's suggesting that women should not be treated like pieces of meat. Representing a pig as a piece of meat, however, is to accept the premise that it's okay to kill this animal. And what's particularly problematic in this ad is that while socially we might think it's okay to kill animals for food, though many of us might disagree with that, this animal was killed just for an advertisement. That's how little value this animal's life had. And these are some obvious examples of groups exploiting other groups to prove their point, but it could be a lot less clear-cut, right? So what about women who choose to go naked for a demonstration? We're going to go back to PETA now. Or pose in an alluring way for an advertisement like the ones we just saw. It becomes more challenging to say outright that this is sexist because women with agency, and often, as we saw in the first ad, with a lot of power, choose to do this. And many women report feeling very empowered by the experience. But with feminist theoretical foundations and with an understanding of intersectionality, we can see why these advertisements and forms of outreach are problematic, even if empowering for individual women. They play off of our culture's love and acceptance of the sexualization and objectification of women and the objectification of other groups. In other words, instead of fighting oppressive structures, they fight other oppressed groups for their own aims. So let's look again at these buttons we saw earlier. Now let me be clear, I think they're very clever and I'm glad they're around this campus. But when we think about intersectionality, we can see that these buttons aren't all the same and they mean different things. While cats against catcalling gives one species some agency in promoting the rights and forwarding the rights of another species, we see I am not a piece of meat, which renders animals objects in promoting the rights of women. So what now? Hopefully I've convinced you that the oppressions are not only interconnected, but they also help to reinforce and generate more oppression. And this might seem like a really hopeless thing to acknowledge, and it may feel like there's no way out of this mess, but I truly believe that there is. I'm not only an academic, but I'm also an advocate for many social justice causes, and I'm also an activist. As an academic, I'm a realist. I like to study, measure, understand the state of the world as it is. But as an activist and as an advocate, I'm a real optimist. In fact, activists, advocates, people who work providing services for other disadvantaged groups, and people who promote social justice are the most optimistic people that I know, because we believe that people can actually open their circle of compassion wider, that compassion is limitless, and that we actually do have the power to change the world that we live in. A logic of total liberation, as opposed to a logic of domination, has the potential to unbind this oppression. Total liberation as an ethic sees all oppressions as tied together. But total liberation does not just see oppressions as tied together in such a way that they're mutually reinforcing and generating and creating more oppression. Rather, total liberation allows us to see the commonalities between different groups, allows us to see that we can work together, and allows us to see hope and strength in each other's struggles and in partnering with other people. As a first step towards total liberation, we must adopt an ethic of intersectionality, which is what I've been talking about for much of today. Meaning that we understand that individuals experience different oppressions differently, that all oppressions matter, and that there are systems in place that allow all of these oppressions to happen. But this is just a starting point. Total liberation moves beyond an ethic of intersectionality by using this ethic of intersectionality as a platform for action. One way to practice an ethic of intersectionality is through solidarity, rejecting the notion that one form of oppression is the most important, and instead rejecting all oppressions. I think that this sign says it best. I can't provide a better definition for you. This guy is holding a sign that says, hey, let's figure this out together. Without solidarity, without the ability to have concern about the issues that others are having, we risk oppressing others. Solidarity avoids a strategy that privileges some oppressions over others and embraces one form of oppression while trying to combat another. This type of solidarity prevents serving meats at a climate justice meeting or handing out single-use water bottles at a slaughterhouse protest. More importantly, solidarity leads movements to support one another. For example, it encourages women's rights activists to show up to a Labor Day protest with a sign that reads, "Feminists in support of farm workers," instead of a sign that reads, "Women are the most exploited workers." A next step is coalition building. Coalitions mean that you agree to work with other groups and you work together to identify common interests and targets that are oppressing both groups. It moves beyond this ideological understanding of other oppressions and seeks out others affected by oppression to work together and to understand each other's histories of oppression, strategies for liberation, and then basically to help each other out. When movements are willing to work together, they're likely to make more gains. Just imagine what we would gain if animal rights activists worked with domestic violence shelters in order to provide a web of shelters for women that were animal friendly. Coalition building expands and sustains the momentum that's necessary to combat the institutionalized economic and political structures that are oppressing women, animals, and many, many others. Instead of viewing other campaigns and groups and movements as opponents who are competing for the same resources that we want, coalition building allows activists to recognize other social movements as their allies in struggle. This enables advocacy groups to build a wide base of support, to increase their numbers, to connect multiple groups together, and create formidable opposition to dominating forces. So here is what I want all of you to do. First, on a really basic level, I want you all to think more critically and compassionately about animals. Curious things happen all the time on this campus and everywhere else. And I want you to start thinking in a way that lets you see some of these things instead of ignoring them. So for example, this is, if you've been outside the athletic center, you know there's really big murals that are pictures on the wall, right? This is a picture that most of you probably walk by every day. But there's something really, really weird happening here. So it's a Scholarship BBQ. They're barbecuing to raise money. But maybe some of you notice, there's a little pig right there. This should bother us. This should seem weird to us. I'm sure that little pig is scared for a variety of reasons, hanging outside at a barbecue. But it should bother us to think that that little pig is sitting next to the burning flesh of his own species. And we have to wonder if he realizes what is going on. So I want you to start trying to look at the world and ask yourselves questions. I don't think anyone who came in here today without the orientation toward respecting non-human animals is going to walk out of here today with that same thought. In fact, many times today, I've seen a lot of smirks or eye rolls at some of the things I've said. And that's okay. I don't expect you to change your mind today, but I want you to be critical thinkers. And not just about non-human animals. I want you to think about the groups that in your life you tend to other. The groups that you think are very different from yourselves and you think of being not like you. Or perhaps, if you can admit to yourself, you might think of them as being not as good as you. And I want you to try to think critically about the world from their perspective and try to notice things that might affect them in a way that it doesn't affect you. Second, I want to leave you with a drive for social change. And I want you to have a drive for social change that's rooted in total liberation. And this is not to say that I think that you should all be animal rights activists or women's rights activists. In fact, as I just said, I think if you came into this room without those orientations, it will take you some time before you decide to embrace those causes, if at all. But we all have passion for some things, and you should do what you're passionate for. The type of action we take can be for many social justice causes, and it can take many different forms. Perhaps you're comfortable protesting a site about exploitation, or maybe you want to educate yourself on an issue and teach others about it, or raise money for a cause, or provide direct services to people in need, or try to change policies or laws, or give petition signs to raise awareness. Whatever you're comfortable with that you think will be successful to help the issue that you care about, I want you to go out there and I want you to do it. but I want you to do it with an ethic of total liberation in your heart and in your actions as well. So this is not to say that the campaigns and the issues and the things you work on need to deal with multiple social justice issues at once. But what it is to say is that before you make decisions, take actions, and promote your cause, be sure to look around and think critically, and make sure that you're not inadvertently or intentionally oppressing any other groups in the process. The world that I want to live in is a world in which no one is oppressed or taken advantage of. I don't want oppression based on species, gender, race, ethnicity, physical ability, intellectual ability, religion, citizenship status, country of origin, sexuality, gender presentation, ideology, or any other part of a person's biography or identity, whether that person is human or non-human. I want everyone to understand how problematic, how oppressive, and how unlogical the logic of domination and oppression really is for all of us. I want freedom from the confines of a system of oppression and from shackles of inequality, and I hope that everyone in this room wants this too. I believe that our only hope of achieving this is to work to this goal through solidarity, through collaboration with each other, and through understanding truly what intersectionality means. I believe that if all of us take this to heart, and all of us are willing to put ourselves out there and to take action to make a better world, the world that I want, the world that I hope you want, is not only possible, but it will happen. It is up to us, and I am confident that we can all do it. Thank you.